I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant and question more.
Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
The world according to Jesse.
Today, we discuss the corporate takeover of American politics and how stakeholder capitalism has harmed American citizens. Sit down. You better watch this show.
The world according to Jesse.
One of the most important and underreported civil rights movements in American history is the movement to secure civil rights for corporations. For the past 2 centuries, corporations have fought to secure the same civil rights that have been awarded to people. The corporate freedom movement has resulted in religious liberty, freedom of speech, and personhood for businesses. Corporate personhood has had far-reaching consequences for average Americans whose own civil rights often fall behind those of corporations. Jesse, you say it all the time, but I want to hear it again. What is it called when corporations run the government?
Well, what it's called when corporations run the government, it's a very simple word. Mussolini'd be proud. It's called fascism.
Open Secrets has found that between 1998 and 2018, the Chamber of Commerce spent over $1.3 billion lobbying the federal government than all labor unions combined, which spent $778 million. The Chamber of Commerce, of course, represents the interests of businesses, while labor unions fight on behalf of workers. Due to the influence of money in politics, workers' rights have suffered. One business that's greatly profited at the expense of its employees is Disneyland. A new report reveals that 10% of Disneyland resort workers in California have been homeless in the past 2 years. A whopping 68% of employees say they don't make enough money to regularly eat, and 36% say they've given up necessities to cover monthly premiums for the company's health plan. In 2016, a custodian at Disneyland's California Adventure Park was found dead in her car where she'd been living. After working 48 hours, 6 days per week regularly, she still couldn't cover the cost of rent or prescriptions. Meanwhile, the so-called happiest place on earth generated more than $3 billion in revenue that year. Jesse, Disneyland has cut employees' wages by 15% since the year 2000. Last year, Disney CEO Bob Iger made $36 million. Why don't big companies like Disneyland provide a living wage for all their employees?
I'll tell you, Brigitte, I don't know. How does Bob Iger sleep at night? Has anyone made him aware of those statistics? Has anyone called him up? I think we should get him on this show, and I would like to ask him how he sleeps at night, making $36 million a year running Disney, while he has employees sleeping in cars in the parking lot and eventually die there, and most of their employees can't even afford nothing? How does this guy sleep? I'll tell you what, these CEOs of corporations, these are the most hard-hearted son of a bitch on this planet. That is unbelievable right there. He makes $36 million and can sleep at night.
Most people are aware that corporations influence policies by funneling money through political action committees. But many people don't know that companies spend nearly 3 times as much influencing American politics through charitable donations. After analyzing the tax returns of 320 foundations linked to Fortune 500 and S&P companies, researchers from several universities have concluded that the spending activities of corporate charities mimic those of PACs. According to the research, when a congressional representative obtained a seat on a committee that was important to the company, corporate foundations gave more to charities in that congressional district. When a representative left Congress, there was a decline in charitable giving in the district, and when a replacement representative gained seniority, corporate foundations began generously giving in that district again. Corporate foundations also gave more money to charities that had a politician on the board. Jesse, charities get tax breaks for the donations, so essentially, we as taxpayers are subsidizing the policies of corporate interests. Were you aware of this type of corporate influence on politics?
Absolutely. Like I've told people before, if you show a chart of corporate welfare and social people welfare, Corporate welfare's way up here, people welfare's way down here. The corporations, people wake up, they're running our country, they don't give a damn about you. Corporations have no conscience. All they have is a bottom line, and that's what we have for a president right now. Somebody who has never held political office other than being a corporate leader. So that's why you got no heart and soul. That's why you've got children being separated from their parents at the border, because you got a corporate guy running America. Welcome to fascism. Now, give me a break. These people are outrageous, and the whole system is broken. So who's to blame for all this? I've been saying it now for 30 years, the Democrats and Republicans. We are not going to get our country back until we quit electing Democrats and Republicans who are handcuffed by the money provided for them and the benefits through corporate fascism.
And this is why it's so hard to get money out of politics, because if we put a financial cap on lobbying through PACs, corporations can then just switch their money around and funnel it through these charities instead. Would you agree with that? That we're never going to get money out of politics?
Well, the big thing is you got to have people from integrity hired in the first place. You got to vote people with integrity into office, Brigitte. I'll use myself as an example because I proudly say it. I made more money being governor than what I spent to get it and raised to get it. I only raised $300,000. $300,000, and I became the governor. Why? I didn't take PAC money. I didn't talk to lobbyists. I took no special interest money. I didn't owe nobody nothing. Then you got to realize that the people that do take this stuff, they're beholding to these people. Therefore, they're going to give them what they want. That is the system the Dems and Repubs have created. It's a system of bribery, and bribery comes in many different ways, but you can bet your damn bottom dollar 95% of the people in Washington today, at least that many, accept these bribes and become rich from them.
In California, housing prices and rent are incredibly high. This plays a huge role in why so many Disneyland employees and other low-wage earners are homeless. Google's parent company, Alphabet, has found a way to get good press and take advantage of the federal government's low-income housing tax credits. Alphabet gets a tax break by spending millions of dollars on affordable housing projects for the poor. It sounds like a win-win, but there is a caveat. The $8 billion federal program gives developers and investors billions of dollars in tax credits with virtually no oversight. In fact, the Government Accountability Office testified in front of Congress that no one in the government even knows how the program works or whether the projects are even being completed. Jesse, the federal government only has two main programs to provide housing for poor people. This is one of them. Taxpayers pay 50% more in tax credits for a program that produces fewer affordable housing units every year just so corporations can get these tax breaks. Do you see how the government consistently rewards businesses at the expense of American citizens?
Absolutely, I see it. Right there, it's in black and white in front of you. And who's running our country now? A corporate CEO. Who do you think's going to make the dough? The corporate. You look right now. Here's a good example, Brigitte. Corporations were told by our Supreme Court that they have the same rights as citizens now, right? Mm-hmm. So how come President Trump gave them a tax cut from 35% down to 21%? Let corporations pay the same taxes citizens pay. If they want to be citizens, they should be citizens all the way. The same taxes. I got to pay way more than 21%. How come corporations get away with 21? If we're equal, then they should pay equally what I pay.
Corporations are increasingly influencing Congress and controlling the rules and regulations of our country. And now, some businesses are taking on government responsibilities. Domino's Pizza, for example, recently announced an initiative to fix America's roads because it doesn't want customers losing deliveries to potholes. Yes, the so-called paving for pizza slogan is hokey, but the plan highlights the fact that the government is not doing a good job working for the people. Last year, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave America's roads a D grade on its infrastructure report card. The foundation says, quote, the U.S. has been underfunding its highway system for years, resulting in an $836 billion backlog of highway and bridge needs. As a result, America's roads are crowded, in poor condition, and getting more dangerous. What do you think about Domino's stepping in here to provide a public service that the government has long ignored?
I think it's embarrassing. I would be embarrassed. But what you got here is simple. Take a look at the infrastructure price you just said, $800 and some billion or whatever. That's exactly what our Democrats and Republicans just recently passed to give the Pentagon all that much amount of money to spend. The Pentagon. So get ready, people. When you hit a pothole here, just remember, we'll be creating large potholes in other countries through the Pentagon. So look at it this way. Their potholes will be bigger than ours, won't they?
It's time for a break. When we return, Jesse sits down with Don Jeffries to discuss his latest book, Survival of the Richest, and how corruption in the marketplace has created the greatest conspiracy of all. We'll be right back.
I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more.
Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
The world according to Jesse.
Redacted Tonight is a comedy news show that is not defanged by the corporate media. We can go after the corporations that destroy our lives, profit over people at every turn.
Redacted Tonight for me is like medicine. It's like an antidote from all the stress that the news puts you under.
Redacted Tonight is a show where you can go to cry from laughing about the stuff that's going on in the world, as opposed to just regular crying.
We're going to find out what the corporate mainstream media is not telling you about, and we're going to filter it through some satirical comedic lenses to make it more digestible. That's what we do every week. Hard-hitting, radical comedy news like Redacted Tonight is where it's at.
I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more.
Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
The world according to Jesse.
In the United States, Americans have lived with financial uncertainty for a couple generations now. Donald Jeffries, author of Survival of the Richest, joins me from Washington, D.C. to discuss the truth about financial inequality. Don, America's founding fathers were all wealthy businessmen. Has our country always been ruled by the rich?
Well, I think pretty much every country in the history of the world has been ruled by the rich. I think this tends to be the way it works. But our founding fathers weren't like the 1% of today. They were statesmen who had broad principles, and I think they actually cared about the general welfare of the public, and certainly they were concerned about liberty and things like that. I don't think you have any 1%ers today that are statesmen like that.
How have the wealthy corrupted the marketplace, and how has it affected the wallets of the working class and the poor people?
Well, I think they've done it in a variety of ways. And certainly just the fact that in recent years you see the very term rich and wealthy is frowned upon, especially in conservative groups. Now they just want to be referred to as job creators. And in many cases they actually act as if getting a job is a privilege and that you should be thankful for anything they pay you. And I think we look at corporate welfare and things like that. One of the main ways they rig the system, where you look at NFL owners and things like that that basically bribe the taxpayers into financing new stadiums for them. There's so many ways the system works in favor of the wealthy, but as we like to say, affluence means influence. If you have money, basically everything comes to you, and if you don't, you're just going to struggle, like about 76% of Americans are now, I believe, who are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that, you know, I'm laughing today a little bit at the Supreme Court ruling that allows sports betting now. I guess I was 20 years ahead of my time because I tried to do that in Minnesota 20 years ago to pay for the stadiums through gambling. And I ran into a brick wall on it, and now apparently they're making it legal again all across the country now. So I was 20 years ahead of my time. What kind of tax breaks can CEOs get that regular people and workers can't? And is this done, of course, by design?
Well, I think it's definitely done by design. And they have something called the CEO loophole, which allows corporations to write off the bonuses, the outrageous bonuses that they give to their upper management, as long as they quantify it as performance bonuses. And certainly looking at some of the performances of these companies and these people, it's ludicrous to claim that they're performing well. I mean, we see certainly with all the golden umbrellas where they pay the Carly Fiorina types $40 million to go away after they run the company. I don't think there's too much performance going on there at all. And I think the greatest example is that of the 9 biggest banks who were bailed out in the 2008 banker bailout, 6 of those banks paid out more in bonuses afterwards than they made in profits that year. It's the height of irresponsibility, and it certainly isn't any kind of sound business practice.
How do they get away with that? These people ought to be, they should have been put in jail for doing that with the public money. And yet, how do they get away with it?
Yeah, well, I think, again, there's not much pressure put on them. I mean, you have people like me out here that are trying to talk about it, but there's not a whole lot of people doing it. And the left really drops the ball on this. They don't stress this enough, I don't believe. And they really should be talking about it. I mean, the main talking point of anyone on the left now, to me, should be the fact that 50% of Americans make less than $27,000 a year. That's half the country basically can't afford. We talked about moving out and so forth on your own. That's, in most parts of the country, that won't even get you a 1-bedroom apartment.
Unbelievable. Let's move to the labor sector. The real unemployment rate is higher than reported. Why are the numbers wrong? What are we missing when they tell us now unemployment's at its lowest ever? Those are fraudulent numbers, aren't they?
Absolutely, and it's ironic because Donald Trump, one of the radical things he said during the campaign, he called out the unemployment numbers and pointed out that they were bogus and that the real unemployment rate is probably 25–30% because they only count the people who are presently collecting unemployment benefits. So if you didn't qualify for unemployment benefits, if your unemployment benefits have run out, or you just chose not to accept them, you're not unemployed according to the government. And this was a change that happened actually back in the 90s under the Bill Clinton administration. It was designed to make the economic picture look rosier, and they still use it. It's bogus, and the media reports it unquestionably instead of pointing out that this is not accurate whatsoever. The unemployment rate is much, much higher than reported.
We got a lot of young people that watch my show, so this question's for them. Businesses love to offering unpaid internships. Is this a new form of indentured servitude?
It certainly looks that way to me. If you're asking someone to work and you're not paying for them, and this is again one of those what I call the new normal throughout survival of the richest, where these awful changes that have taken place in the last 20, 30 years, what we didn't used to see. You used to have unpaid, used to have internships that were paid. They might not have made much, but they represented a great opportunity, usually to young college students. Now, however, and I believe I have quite a bit in the book about that, where you have people that have struggled through this. The unpaid internships didn't lead to anything else, and yeah, it is indentured servitude. But again, you don't hear too many people talking about it.
Let's go back to unemployment for a second. Why doesn't mainstream media show that the numbers are fraudulent?
Well, I think we get to talk about why doesn't the mainstream media do a lot of things. Certainly, you and I know from talking about the JFK assassination for years. Why don't they tell the truth about that? They just don't do a very good job of reporting anything. And you'd think that the Bernie Sanders types and Elizabeth Warrens and people on the left would talk more about it. But they really don't, because it needs to be pointed out that it is based on a fraudulent figure. And I think, again, it's all designed to make things look like they're better than they are. And that's why it's so disappointing that Donald Trump, who did point that out in his campaign, now is bragging about the unemployment figures, and they're the exact same figures he criticized. But when, and that's how it usually works with this Democratic-Republican thing, where whoever's in office is going to brag and claim they're doing great, and they'll blame the predecessor.
Well, I think the case here is Donald Trump has quickly become a politician. You know, he ran on the lights of being a businessman and cleaning out the swamp, but he dove right into the swamp and became one of them. That's my opinion.
Absolutely.
Anyway, let's talk about debt. What is debtor's prison and how does that work? I remember there was a time in the United States they had debtor's prison. And if that were the case today, wouldn't we have to put our entire Congress in prison?
Yeah, that certainly seems that way, wouldn't it? Well, you know, Charles Dickens, one of my favorite writers, wrote about debtor's prisons back in the 1850s. And I thought we had left that kind of stuff behind, but he also wrote about child labor and exploitation of children, and that's making a comeback as well. It's one of the saddest things, and again, I write about this quite a bit in the book. You see examples in several states where they're basically, they are debtors' prisons. They're putting people in prison for unpaid traffic tickets and even unpaid court costs from their previous appearances and costs. And they're actually billing them for being in prison in many cases. It's an awful situation, but like everything else I write about in the book, the deck is stacked against the poorer you are, the less rights you have, and almost anything is up for grabs. They can do almost anything they want to you if you're poor enough, and no one protests because they don't have a voice. And obviously, there appear to be very few civil libertarians left, or anyone with a public platform that is talking out for them.
What's going on now? I grew up at the height of the 60s when protesting probably hit its greatest multitude it could have ever gotten to. What the hell has gone on from then to today? Is it because we got jackboot government people out there ready to knuckle heads and throw everyone in prison to exercising their First Amendment rights?
Yeah, I think that's all part of it. I think, unfortunately, this generation, and it's ironic that the flower children and the hippies, when they got in charge, they ended up being a lot more authoritarian than the old World War II generation, which was hard to believe. But I mean, there are more laws, more restrictions. Certainly things like free speech zones would have been unthinkable, you know, a few decades ago, even a decade ago. But the idea that again, the people who have no money have no power. Affluence means influence, and there's just no one talking. We need people like Mark Lane or Nat Hentoff, people that used to exist, civil libertarians on the left, and that's what I consider myself. But we need someone with a large public platform that will talk about these things and point out that we've not only lost our liberties, but we've lost our empathy, and we're creating a third world nation with this gap between the rich and the poor.
I can't believe today that there's no protesting over the wars. I mean, to me, it's absurd today. And I'll tell you what the problem is with my generation. I'm going to give you a little of Jesse here. The problem is we've allowed the chicken hawks to get elected. All the people that ran from the service ran away and hid. Dick Cheney, George Bush, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, all chicken hawks wouldn't go in the service, and yet they're the ones running the country today. And I think that's the ultimate problem we have today.
Absolutely. I mean, Cindy Sheehan is you know, I'm sure you know her. I communicate with her on Facebook quite a bit. And she's always talking about how sad the left is and why, you know, we can get marches up for social justice warrior type issues. But I think the only way you could get today's left to march against war would be if they could prove they weren't letting transgenders fight or something. That's all they're concerned about. They don't care about the fact that America is getting involved all over the world and killing people left and right, getting our own people killed, destroying things and then rebuilding them up while our own country falls apart. They don't seem to care about that. They just care about these issues that are just dividing the country, and Trump is the lightning rod there for that. They seems to, whatever they're protesting seems to center around him as a personality.
Don, we're running out of time, but again, thank you very much. Keep up the fight out there, because I think it's people like you and I that have to keep talking. We can't quit. You don't dare quit. Jefferson warned us you had to be a vigilant citizen. You, sir, are a vigilant citizen. Thank you for taking your time and sharing your research with us.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
The world according to Jesse.
Jesse, let's turn to the viewers. We asked people on social media, if corporations are people too, should they face criminal liability when people die due to negligence? And what crimes could result in charges of corporate manslaughter? Chuck says corporations should fall under the same laws as the average middle-class person, but like the average billionaire, they can buy their way out of criminal charges, money talks, and the justice system listens. How do you respond?
I agree totally with that. Again, my viewers are so intelligent, I'll tell you what, they're listening. Because I can't add nothing to that. Absolutely, the corporations will buy their way out of any trouble, where you, an average middle-class citizen, get ready, you're going to the hooskow.
Krista gave us a great example by pointing to an article that says Purdue Pharma and its executives have been sued in Massachusetts for their role in fueling the opioid epidemic, which has killed 700 people in the state over the past decade. What do you think about this example? Is that something that these people could be prosecuted for, potentially?
Well, I think that it's something that's out there and should be held accountable, but get ready, because the government will do something to shield that big corporation. They do that in many of the laws and many of the bills that they pass. They put it in the small print that these places can't be sued or nothing like that. There can't be class action suits. They're tearing those things apart left and right. You can't class action sue corporations barely anymore at all now. And so again, when corporations run your elected officials, all the laws that come out will benefit corporations, not people. And yet corporations say they want to be treated like people. No, they simply want to be treated like people when it benefits them. When it doesn't benefit them, they want their own rules.
You kind of answered this already, but Kelly is on to you there. She says, of course they should, but they never will. Corporations get all the benefits of being human with none of the liability, which you just addressed. Jesse, final thoughts. How can we get our democracy out of the corporate death grip?
Well, it's as simple as the nose on your face, Brigitte, but as hard as climbing Mount Everest. You have to vote Democrats and Republicans out of office, because it all leads back to the bribery system they've created, where they all get paid off. Notice for a fact how many legislators go into Congress and they're not millionaires, but yet when they come out, they're multimillionaires. How does that happen? What is it that they're privy to? They have a set salary. They're doing public work. They're doing, how do they term that, serving the public. Well, how do you serve the public if you go into the job not being a millionaire and come out a millionaire? That's serving yourself, not the public.
Thanks so much for watching today's show. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode about laws designed to take down the mob and how they're now being used against teachers, motorcycle clubs, and entire communities of color.
Until next time, remember, people, when the government lies, the truth becomes a traitor. Stay vigilant.
I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant. Question more.
Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
The world according to Jesse.